So I would say we probably would want to wait just a little bit more as the attendees are coming into the room.
And two of my speakers haven't joined yet, so I'd like to have them on before we get moving.
Yeah, exactly. That's critical.
It would be helpful.
Yeah, that would be great. And just for the attendees that have joined the meeting today, we are recording it so that we will have it available. If there's someone who is not able to attend today, they'll be able to see it as well. But in general, this is an opportunity for us. And Steve, are you running this, or I was just going to make a couple comments? But
yeah, I was just going to ask you, Rob. I thought that's would be a great idea to have you kind of kind of paint the initial picture, if you will, of kind of how we came with this, and because we're in this in a joint venture, if you will. We're partners in this whole process.
Definitely. Well, then thank you for that. And so really this was an opportunity to, unfortunately in the time of COVID, we had been talking several months ago as we were making strides relative to the 104 realignment, as well as the holding lot feasibility study, saying, okay, well, we just kept waiting for the numbers to get better and to be able to actually have a meeting in person in the community. And when more and more it became pretty apparent that wasn't going to happen, we switched gears to utilize more of an electronic format. And so thus the Zoom meeting today, but we wanted to take the opportunity to bring folks up to speed and hopefully have everybody get the same information, as opposed to having information shared with one stakeholder group, with another stakeholder group, et cetera, and making sure that we didn't end up having sort of that telephone game, happening where the message keeps changing and the understanding keeps changing as that information is shared.
Right.
But really the main two focuses, one is to provide some update on the realignment project, as where we are with that, as well as the Lindvog holding lot feasibility study, and just sort of share that information and potentially begin to address some of the next steps. And I apologize in advance if I have to turn off my camera. That's because I need to save bandwidth, and that may be the case for some of our presenters today as we keep on getting those. You have unstable or unstable internet connection. Those things pop up a lot these days.
Yeah.
Other than that, thank you all for attending, and we'll make sure that as per always, I believe the functionality is in place that if you are on as an attendee and have a question, when we get to that point, we'll be able to raise your hand and let us know that you have a question for the panelists, and we'll go from there. And then we'll also try to do a pretty good monitoring of the chat as well. And I think, let's see, can Brent and Mike please be added as panelists? So
yeah, that's my request.
Yeah, Rebecca, if you could find Brent and Mike and pull them over as panelists, as well as David Fort, please.
Thank you.
And great suggestion, Walt or Bobby, is that we'll do an introduction of all of the panelists today once we get folks pulled over as appropriate.
Yes.
And which Dave is that? You said Dave?
Patty, which Dave is that? You're muted.
It's David Fort
Yeah, he's
needs
over.
to come over.
Okay.
And then also Mike Hendricks, if you haven't gotten him.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
Mike Hendricks.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have David Fort, and I don't see Mike Hendricks yet. There he is. Okay, so why don't we start with introductions. I'm Rob Gelder, Kitsap County Commissioner for the north end of the county, and I'll just call you out. How about I do that as opposed to we kind of trip over each other doing that?
That sounds great, Rob.
And Rebecca, could you also pull over Crystal Donner? That would be great. And so Steve, go ahead. Introduction.
Hi, I'm Commissioner Steve Heacock with the Port of Kingston, and very happy that we could all be together on this Zoom meeting. Thank you for organizing it.
How about Patty?
As soon as I can get my mouse to my mute button. Patty Buchanan, I'm with Petite, part of the consultant team working with the partner agencies for the design of and feasibility of the remote holding lot.
Great. And just so you know, I'm going by how I see you on my screens, not in any particular order. So Andy Larson.
I'm Andy Larson. I'm with Washington State Department of Transportation. I'm an engineer there in the Port Orchard BEO office.
Great, thank you. Mr. Horton.
I'm Mark Horton. I'm an engineering consultant working for the Port of Kingston, and this is one of the many projects that I've been involved in over the last couple of years.
Great, thank you. Andy Nelson.
Hi, I'm Andy Nelson, the Kitsap County Public Works Director.
Joanne Schuler, although your name gets truncated, you know, on your screen, Schul.
Jay Schul, huh? Okay. I'm Joanne Schuler. I'm WashDOT's the Olympic Region Assistant Region Administrator.
And I know my first John Vizina is not John Vizina. It would be Greg.
Yeah, not John Vizina. Greg Faust. I'm the Marine Operations Director for Washington State Ferries.
And Brent.
Hi there, Brent Powell with Petite, the design consultant for the remote holding lot. So I'm working on the traffic analysis piece.
Thank you. David Fort.
David Fort, Kitsap County Public Works.
Mike Hendricks.
Hi, I'm Mike Hendricks. I'm also with the Petite team. My role is primarily on the ITS and advanced traffic management features.
Mr. Clausen.
Yes, John Clausen, Executive Director of Kitsap Transit, and the wonders of technology. I'm sitting in the parking lot of my dentist office waiting for my 2:30 dentist appointment. So I'll be jumping off at 2:30, but technology is wonderful. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad you have a good cell signal there, if they're not providing you Wi-Fi. Crystal Donner.
Good afternoon, I'm Crystal Donner. I'm the president of Petite and the principal in charge on this project.
Great, thank you. John Vizina, the real John Vizina.
John Vizina, Government Relations Director for Washington State Ferries. I have no idea why I'm 3 times in this room, which is at least 2.5 times more than anyone needs of me. But Greg and I and whoever else I'm here with will be happy to answer questions.
Okay, well, we'll try to identify the final Mr. Vizina.
I hope it's not me.
Well, anytime you share a link, it ends up sharing your name. So, okay. And we could actually probably, Rebecca, I don't know if you can relabel Greg so that he shows up as Greg. And then when we get to our last Mr. Vizina, we can relabel.
Thanks, Commissioner.
Well, Stephanie Lilly. You're muted.
Darn buttons. Stephanie Lilly, Kitsap Transit, Capital and Service Development Director.
Thank you. Linda Owens.
So I'm jumping between 2 screens, which is why we have a side view. I'm sitting in for Senator Christine Rothfuss. We've been involved on this project for many years.
Great, thank you. And we actually only got from your nose down when you're switching between screens. There you go. There you go. So we have Mary McClure. Rebecca, if you could try to pull Mary over. She, I believe, is in the room and can't get onto our screen. Then our last John Vizina. Who is our last John Vizina? I don't know. Well,
it's either Leonard Smith or Trevor Sharp. They were going to monitor, probably Leonard Smith.
Okay. Well, we'll leave them as John for right now and potentially relabel later. We have Mary McClure. Would like to introduce yourself?
Yes, Mary McClure, Commissioner with the Port of Kingston, and I have been involved with trying to find solutions for this segment of the roadway since 1991. Right? I'm really glad we're all here. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we have Jennifer Haro, who is also with the Commissioner's Office. And thank you for helping to coordinate this along with Rebecca and providing the technical support as we move forward. Other than that, that's the introductions for those who are on the as panelists today. And Steve, are you going to then kind of guide who is going to be our next presenter? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Well, as you know, this culmination, we have a lot of involvement in this 5-agency project, and I'd like to really shout out to Senator Rolfes for providing the funding mechanism to get this particular design effort completed. As you know, we had originally looked at this as a feasibility study, but we were actually able to incorporate additional design elements and engineering and discovery as well in relation to wetlands on site and things like that we'll get to in here in just a second. But I really wanted to do a shout out to Senator Rolfes and her team, and also to our partners who also supported that particular effort. But the 5 team members are Washington State Ferries, obviously, and Washington State Department of Transportation, Kitsap County, Kitsap Transit, and then the Port of Kingston seem to be, in relation to this project, a real good clue for our most local connectivity, if you will, to be able to get a consultant and go through this particular design effort. And so with that in mind, again, I think what we'll do is I'll pass this over to Patty. And Patty Buchanan, do you want to go ahead and we'll get going on the presentation?
Sure. All right. So I was going to say maybe without further ado, but there's still some process to get to actually an in the ground thing. But I know this has been a project that's been long coming for the community. So in working with the partner agencies, we went through a feasibility study and developed all the background substantiating reports, right up to a 30% plan and a 30% cost estimate to move forward with the project, or to support forward movement for the project. As a part of that, we developed a number of studies and documents to support the project. They include a traffic analysis report, which Brent and Mike will talk about after I run through some of the other stuff, and then also share a video of some of the work that came out of that. A preliminary geotechnical engineering report for the site, a critical area study and a preliminary impact assessment, cultural resources assessment, 30% plans, a 30% drainage report, and as I mentioned, the construction and engineering cost estimate for the project. Sorry, my mouse is not behaving. All right, so the preliminary engineering report was conducted in November of last year, and our initial assessment prior to field investigations, particularly knowing that there was existing wetlands on the site, made us think that infiltration was probably going to be pretty challenging on the site. Much to our surprise, there is some infiltration potential. However, because of the type of construction anticipated for this site, with retaining walls to get up to an actual holding lot space, infiltration is not recommended for the project site. So low impact features like rain gardens and things were not chosen for the drainage design. That was also with respect to downhill properties and protecting those, understanding that there is concerns about wet soil, seepages, and that sort of thing. So there's multiple reasons that we didn't want to re-infiltrate on this site. The soils report did show that from a construction standpoint, there's nothing that would preclude building this project. So it was all good information from that. We completed a critical area study and preliminary impact assessment. There's 4 wetlands on this site, 1 category 3 and 1 category 4. And what that measures is the quality of that wetland, what contribute to it, the value of the habitat, and a variety of other features. What that category does is tell you what your mitigation requirements are going to be. So the category 1 or category 3 rather will have a larger mitigation, category 4 a little bit smaller. So we do have an impact assessment for this, and there will be requirements for mitigation. Because the quality of site is already well forested and that sort of thing, it's very likely that some mitigation will be required to occur off-site. So that's one of the primary next steps as we move forward, as the design moves forward, is to evaluate that. And there is some preliminary information in the report that talks about where there may be some potential sites throughout the basin. A cultural resources report was completed. This was in some ways an update to a previous report, but it also included the additional county property, which wasn't included in previous efforts. Because of location and with coordination with tribes, the only requirement for this at the moment, the recommendation is that there's monitoring during construction. So there's no cultural resources concerns with this particular site other than normal measures that we would take during construction processes. A 30% plan set was developed that included grading, drainage, paving layout, a layout of access into the site, access out of the site, how that works with the intersection there at Lindvog. And we can share some of those, but I'll wait and share some of those as we go through some of the traffic, because then it actually makes more sense in how it looks and how these things will feel. In general, the layout is very linear, right adjacent to the road, and was right-sized to minimize impacts to the site. So we're not taking the whole site because it just wasn't necessary to achieve the goals for the project. And then I'll save the construction, I'll talk about the construction costs at the end of our discussion. So you can see everything else first and then understand what the cost of that project is. One thing I did skip on just now was talking about what is the goal of the project, right? This is a safety and an economic impact project. Currently, the traffic backs up and causes all sorts of congestion downtown. So those who live there can't access, can't get the ferry. It's problematic, and it creates safety issues along SR 104. The goal of this project was to get that standing traffic out of downtown Kingston and into a lot as they wait for the ferry, and also to create smooth ferry operations so that we're never waiting on cars to get to the main lot to load the ferry. So there's a variety of pieces that go on with a lot of timing and right sizing. So I'm going to hand this over to Brent. Are you or Mike going to go first?
I'll start, Patty. Okay,
and just let me know when you want me to pull up the video. I do have it queued up.
Sure, I think that'd be great to do as Mike starts talking about some of the elements in the system.
We'll go ahead and share my, oh, you want me to wait for a second?
Yeah, you can hold off for a minute there, but.
Okay.
One second, Patty, just want to make sure that we are tracking sort of the chat as well. So there was a request from Allison O'Sullivan for some of the materials that you referenced. So I want to make sure that you're aware of that so that you can follow up afterward, okay? And we'll make sure that we save the chat as well so we can do that follow-up.
Okay, great.
Yep.
I just emailed it to Allison.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, good. So taken care of. Check.
Yep.
All right. Brent?
Sure. So my role on this project was to look at the traffic analysis side of things and traffic demand in particular. And so one of the key questions we had at the beginning of this study was how big do we need to make this facility to fully achieve the goals that we were looking to do here? So as Patty mentioned, we have some goals to alleviate the congestion through the downtown community of Kingston. Also, there were some goals to reduce the level of backup along the shoulder space on the state route. So what we were looking at was basically how do we balance the demand that we anticipate not only today but in the future versus really the capacity of the system and how many vehicles can move through the ferry system. So ultimately, we worked through some calculations there in manners that are similar, kind of borrowing from the principles of how you'd size a parking lot or an intersection turn lane to really balance your facility, not make it gigantic, but provide a reasonable level of space for vehicles to wait at this remote holding lot to hopefully balance cost and efficiency of this facility. So ultimately, what we ended up looking at was traffic volumes all the way out through the year 2040, which over time we anticipate traffic volumes will grow. Of course, we're kind of in the middle of a very abnormal period for traffic volumes today with the way that COVID has affected particularly commuting patterns. But the interesting thing about this project is when we're talking about the real peaks of maximum demand for the facility here, the ferry system, we've seen those mostly on weekends or holidays or time periods that we anticipate will be less affected or maybe not even affected at all, kind of in the long term by the COVID impacts here. So for example, if we're, as a region, we may well be heading towards a lot more people working at home, and that would affect things in the morning and afternoon commute hours on weekdays. But we don't anticipate that would have a giant impact or a significant impact at all on traffic volumes on these really peak demand periods that we were looking at here. So we have confidence, even though we did this analysis a few months ago before really the COVID situation was in full bloom, we do have confidence that the analysis we did is still current and proper for this facility. And ultimately, what we were looking at was designing, like I said, out to 2040 with the traffic volumes, but also looking at what the Washington State ferry system intends to do over the next few years. And there's actually a long-range plan that anticipates an improvement to the capacity of the system by actually changing to smaller vessels that sail more often. So overall, in the course of an hour, for example, you'd actually be able to put more vehicles through the system from the dock lot that we have here. So trying to balance those two things, we came up with a facility size of 380 vehicles. And that would really be kind of our largest target that we'd want to hit. We may get into a discussion here that there's some opportunities to reduce project cost by going to a smaller facility, which we can get into a little bit later, maybe after Mike's talked through his parts of the presentation. But to really accommodate as much traffic as possible, we were looking at having 11 lanes in the holding lot that would have about 35 vehicles per lane that they could hold, which totals 385 vehicles. And by our math, that would give us about a 10% cushion on what we were really shooting for. And what we were shooting for was to get as many vehicles as possible off of the shoulder on the state route. We were really trying to accommodate a pretty typical peak condition on one of these weekends or holidays completely in this holding lot, this remote holding lot. And then in the instances where we had slightly higher demand than that typical peak, we would use that shoulder space, but hopefully it wouldn't fill up nearly as far as it does today or regularly on last summer or something like that. So that was really the configuration we looked at. As Patty mentioned, we did come up with a bit of a linear design for the facility here, so we can show that in a few minutes as well. But I think with that, Mike, I'll turn it over to you to talk through some of the elements about how we would manage those 385 vehicles as they move through the facility and then ultimately down through the dock itself.
Great, thanks, Brent. Patty, can you go ahead and maybe pull up the plan sheet so I can go ahead and speak to the various items? I think if we just go to the first sheet of the entry where we come into the lot.
Okay.
So as Patty is getting that ready, I'll just go ahead and talk about kind of the four principles that we looked at in how to design a system for this holding lot, because this will be a very unique holding lot compared to other locations throughout the state. The first item is to go ahead and to talk about making sure that this is clear and understandable by the users. As Brent had mentioned, as everyone's aware, with the peaks happening during more of the weekends and the holiday periods, it's possible that you could have a number of people who are not truly familiar with how this lot works. So we need to make sure that it's very clear and understandable by these users. What helps on that is that it also helps reduce the overall technology, amount of technology to go ahead and use. The second is to make sure that we maintain the proper order so that the people who are there first are the first out to get to the ferry, to make sure that we're still maintaining that, that order. The third is to try to minimize the need for additional ferry staff as much as possible. And this helped inform our choices of going to a more technology heavy solution compared to a staff heavy solution. And then finally, we wanted to go ahead and make sure that vehicles that are ready to board the vessels are already on the dock. So what you see here is actually the vehicles that will be held back. Vehicles which are going to be on the next ferry will already be at the ferry dock ready to go. So there's not a delay for ferry operations. It's very critical to make sure that we ensure that works. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and just walk through the process of what a vehicle, a driver and a vehicle would do to go through the process here. So on the top of your screen, you'll see that this is Highway 104 and that the lot itself is arranged linearly parallel to the highway. So when a driver is coming into the lot, they'll be traveling on Highway 104, pull into the lot here of a right turn, where they'll then go ahead and activate a ticket machine, similar to what you might see at a parking garage. We have a detector there to make sure that it's a vehicle that is present, and then the ticket machine will turn on. A driver will then go ahead, take out a ticket. I want to be clear that this ticket is not a boarding pass onto the ferry, rather it's a queuing pass. And so what that does is it tells the driver where they are in the order of that they've come in. So the ticket itself would have a QR code or a UPC code on it, which would indicate the number where it comes into the queue. Also on that ticket will be a number. It will be a lane number. So that number will be matching to the lane that the driver needs to go into. And further, in addition to this information, the speaker on the ticket machine, excuse me, would say, driver, proceed to lane 4, for example. So then the gate would then open. The driver would then go ahead and proceed to the lane that they had been indicated to go into. What you see here, and this is a plan view, but we do have a more of a schematic view in the report, which shows that the driver would see a number of overhead signs that would have either red X's indicating that the lane is closed, or a green arrow that would then go ahead and tell the driver which lane to choose. These are going to be very similar to the signs that people may have seen on Interstate 5 or SR 520 in the Seattle metropolitan area. So they'll be very large and very visible as well. Now, as the driver comes in, I just want to go ahead and hit one other item, is that at the entry, we would have a license plate reader camera. Now, this is critical because what this will do is it'll mark the order that the vehicles came into the lot to ensure that they've also left the lot in the order. This is kind of something that a user would not experience, but is rather to help as an enforcement mechanism in case a driver decides to maybe try and cut the queue, get in front of others, and then get down to the lot. It helps provide the system with some enforcement mechanism. Now, then as the driver will then go ahead, enter the designated lane that they'd like, or rather that the system has told them to do, they'll go ahead and they'll wait until that lane is released to the ferry. Now, what would happen is that the concept is to release one full lane at a time. Now, Patty, if you can go ahead, just go to one page, there it is. So that as the queue is released, one entire lane of 35 vehicles will then be released through the lot and to go and enter into Highway 104, where they'll go ahead and they'll get a queue jump. So for example, people who are on 104, maybe wanting to take a right onto Lindvog, would be restricted during that time, so that vehicles would, from the holding lot, would then queue into 104 and head on down to the ferry. It'd be a temporary restriction, and that would be indicated with a blank out sign, which would have a no right turn when that option occurs. This is similar to what's occurring in Clinton and Whidbey Island for a similar location, or a similar location near the ferry dock there. And as I mentioned about the license plate reader camera at the opening, there will also be a license plate camera here as well to track when those vehicles have left the lot. Now, so then those vehicles would then go ahead and continue to the dock, where they would be, where they would go pay their toll to go ahead and get onto the ferry dock and wait for the next boat. What is helpful on this one here is that that license plate reader camera system also allows a ferry operator to go ahead and say, wait a minute, you weren't here and you are out of order, and could go ahead and send them back to the lot. Also, in addition, there'll be further infrastructure at the toll booths themselves to inform the system at the holding lot when to release more vehicles. We want to make sure that when we release these vehicles that we don't flood downtown Kingston with traffic just to sit there and wait. So for example, if all 3 ferry booths are open and people are processing pretty rapidly through, that's great. However, if it's a shift change, maybe there is a collision or some other incident which may have occurred either on the route to the ferry dock, or even if something is going on at the ferry itself, the system could then go ahead and make sure that it's not continuing to send vehicles to the dock. So we can go ahead and make sure that they're being held at the ferry. One advantage of having these large signs, and we propose to have them at 4 locations throughout the holding lot, is that we could also go ahead and use those to display time, such as wait time, so that someone who is waiting at their car, they can go ahead and make sure that they know when when their lane will be released, and can go ahead and continue to either sit, wait, go to the restroom, and give them an idea of when they'll be able to go to the dock. So I'll go ahead, let Brent go ahead and talk about the traffic modeling that he did, and the rough calculations that we have done to indicate when these vehicles could be released in a normal operation.
Mike, before you make that transition to Brent, there's a question in the chat box about, will the Lindvog traffic lights releases be metered to allow local traffic between holding lane release? In other words, will there be an alternating a holding lane release with a local letting local traffic through and then doing another release?
Correct. I could let Brent speak about, I believe we calculated every 7 minutes roughly that the holding lot would release a lane. So that would allow people who are on Lindvog needing to turn right or turn left or go through the intersection, or even folks who are on 104 and wanting just to go to downtown, it would allow that operation to occur. I hope I answered that question. If not, please let me know.
Yeah, and I can add on to that, Mike. So the signal at Lindvog would be coordinated with the remote holding lot. So as Mike was describing, vehicles will have kind of this platoon that they're released in, and it will be 1 lane at a time or up to a full lane at a time. And as that lane is released, they will approach the Lindvog signal and see a green light, and everybody else will have a red light. So they will be able to go through the Lindvog signal. And the benefit of this system is really you keep everything in this kind of tight platooning mechanism. So these up to 35 cars are going to travel together through Lindvog down to the next intersection and beyond. Now there might be a couple driveways or something people, create a little backup for them, but it's going to be pretty minimal, and they'll be able to move pretty smoothly down as a group to the dock toll booths, where they will still, pay their fee and all that stuff to get back on the dock lot there. So that's actually a great segue into kind of the driver experience as you go through the rest of the project here. So we were working with an assumption, but it's not necessarily a mandatory assumption, that the SR 104 project, which I know we're going to speak about in a few minutes here, would be completed. So Patty, do you want to pull up that video? We have a video simulation of what the traffic operations would look like, assuming that the dock lot is in place still. Of course, we have the remote holding lot as well, and then also this SR 104 realignment project complete. So there's what you see on the screen now is a video simulation that we developed with our traffic modeling tool to really test this concept to make sure it would actually accomplish the goals we were looking for. So what you see on the screen here, kind of on the right half of the screen where there's a whole bunch of blue dots on the screen there, that is our proposed remote holding lot. So you can see it actually pretty well mimics what we were showing on that plan sheet a few minutes ago. And you can see a number of cars that are waiting right there in the lot. There's a number of cars, all these blue vehicles here. These are all vehicles that are trying to get to the ferry. So this is their first stop on one of these weekend congested periods. So you can see what I was just talking about a minute ago here. We can see a vehicle path being released from one of the lanes of the holding lot. It's going through the signal at Lindvog, and now it's approaching the rest of downtown Kingston, where it'll get through to ultimately the dock lot. And I'll mention in the screen here, you may be able to pick out there's some yellow vehicles as well. That's just local traffic. That's traffic that hopefully will not be blocked by any of these ferry operations or vehicles trying to get to or from the ferry. So you can see they're moving pretty smoothly through here. They're not gridlocked like they might be under the current conditions. And then there's a number of red vehicles you see on the screen as well. Those are vehicles that are coming off a ferry that just arrived. So at this particular time in the simulation, we have a ferry vessel that's come through and it's releasing a whole bunch of trips onto this side of the route. So we're now moving through the downtown Kingston area, and there's a couple roundabouts there you can see on the screen that comes through with the SR 104 realignment project. And I'll point out here, you can see the end of the blue cars on the street there. It just went off screen, but that is really what we're trying to aim for, a minimized queue length through downtown Kingston that's managed by the holding lot. So that's really one of the big benefits of the holding lot, is we are able to release vehicles in these smaller platoons. And so we can manage how many cars are really sitting on the roadway through downtown Kingston that might end up blocking local traffic if they weren't under the same system of control. So now with the video here, we're seeing some activity actually moving these blue vehicles onto the ferry that you can see on the left side of the screen, and that ferry will actually depart here after it loads up enough traffic and gets on its path. So I think with that, Patty, I'll turn it back over to you. We can keep this running if you'd like to. If there's any questions about it, certainly I'm happy to answer them. But I think that covers the main points of really how you would move through this system and ultimately down to the dock lot. And then once you get to the dock lot, it's a very similar experience to what it is today. You still will have to wait for your turn to get on the boat, and do the same payments and all that stuff down at the toll booths there. And actually, Patty, I have one more thing that I want to bring up just before I forget about it. But we have been talking a lot about congested periods on the weekends or holidays. But we want to make sure that this system works for folks who are using it for commutes, who don't want to wait forever in a remote holding lot and then also wait forever in a dock lot. And the system is designed to handle that type of behavior as well. So when we've been talking about, really trying to fill up this remote holding lot, that doesn't have to happen in these lower demand periods. If we're talking about a midday on a Thursday or whatever, or even a morning or evening commute on a typical weekday, if we're seeing that demand is pretty well managed just by lower traffic volumes in the first place, we can start releasing vehicles more quickly through that remote holding lot, so they'll be able to get down almost potentially similar to how they would just kind of drive to the dock lot under today's conditions and have a pretty minimal wait. We want to be able to mimic that with the remote facility as well. So I think that's a really key element, that we're really looking at this remote facility as being a valuable tool during these really congested periods. But hopefully outside of those, it's a pretty minimal impact, even though it will still be something that everybody will drive through to get to the ferry at any time of day, any day of the week. And with that, Patty, go ahead.
All right, thanks. I was trying to get my mute to show again. So the last couple of things I just want to hit on is just a touch base on the stormwater. I mentioned previously that as a part of the documents, we actually went through a preliminary stormwater report. So for stormwater management, of course, the system will be designed to protect the wetlands that are on site. And also it will be coordinated with the other projects that are going on in Kitsap County for stormwater improvements. So that's the stormwater element. And then the last but not least is just to touch base on the, sorry, I've got too many things showing and it's causing fun. Was to just give a quick rundown of the cost for the project. Pardon me for stop sharing for a second, it's locked up my screens. I'll put the video back on in just a moment. There we go. All right, so the total construction cost for the project at a 30% estimate with contingency is $10 million. And of that cost, there were three elements that really were big ticket items. The first of which are the active traffic management systems. I know that will be a conversation piece that we'll talk a bit more about in a moment. Then combined, the earthwork, paving, and grading items were $2 million. There is quite a bit of earthwork required to bring the site up to something that it resembles a parking lot. Requires some walls and grading, so some costs there. And then drainage elements were $750,000, sorry, let me get my number straight, of the big ticket items for the cost for the project. And with that, I think we've covered all the things we needed to cover. Rob or Steve, do you want to?
So we've got a couple of questions. If we could address those before we go on, that way they remain fresh, that would be great. So Beth had a question for Mike, and you also can probably pull this up in your chat so I don't have to read to everybody. But if you'd like me to, I can. But it's really about a question about the need for vehicles as they're released from the holding lot to proceed directly down to the dock. Or are they able to stop at a business briefly and not run afoul of sort of the timing and their ability to be let in through the toll booth?
Yes. So the idea behind that is that primarily during those high demand periods, we would like the drivers to continue down to the dock, understanding that in some of these periods, they could be waiting for an hour, 2 hours or more, just trying to get down to the dock. There is the possibility that there could be some flexibility and a grace period for when that, that queuing pass could be used. It does complicate the system. It complicates user understanding as well. So would rather that not be an element, that pretty much they would then proceed directly to the dock as well, because then once that vehicle is not in the system, it's very difficult for the system to figure out when it comes back in. So yeah, definitely probably not during the high demand periods. It is a possibility maybe to consider during the low demand periods, however.
Okay. The other question is Ken from Nancy. Can you describe the on-demand use of the holding lot?
Yeah, I think I can take that one. So the intent would be, if I'm understanding the question correctly about on-demand use, that's one of those lower traffic volume time periods is what I'm assuming. So correct me if that's wrong, Nancy, with a comment in the chat there. But under those time periods, if we only want to have the system in place if we didn't have it in place, we'd have a lot of queuing that would block up downtown. Those time periods where we have lower traffic volumes, we don't anticipate that queuing issue. And if it's there, it's maybe there for a minute or two, but it's not like a prolonged queuing problem. During those time periods, what we anticipate is that really the remote facility will be a pit stop you have to make, but you might not even stop your car there. You will have to go through the gate system to get into the remote lot, but then it's likely a situation in those time periods where the overhead message signs that Mike was describing will just say proceed to dock, and you can just get on your way and you won't have to sit in the holding lot for any sort of specified release window. So that's the intent of the system there. So hopefully it would be minimal delay under those circumstances.
And then we have a question from Chris about, will a 35 car platoons proceed without stopping to the toll booth? In other words, coordination of all traffic signals.
Yes, the intent would be that the traffic signals are coordinated along the route. However, even if they weren't, as long as we keep the cars together, we anticipate things will work smoothly. We'd really be potentially in a little more tricky situation if, half the lot or half of a lane went and then the other half of the lane had to sit at a traffic light behind it or something like that. But as long as things are moving together, it should operate well. And we're in a situation here where once we get through that Lindvog signal, there's only one more in the travel path to get down to the dock. So that's a pretty minimal opportunity for any sort of issue that would develop, even if we didn't have coordinated systems here. But I think our intent here is to have a coordinated traffic signal system through both intersections as well.
Okay, and then Tekla had a question about local traffic coming from the east, say downtown, and then going toward the new holding lot. What would their approach be? So if someone's already downtown and they need to get into the queue and into the system, how would they approach that? And she sort of, from West Kingston, Miller Bay Road, Barber Cutoff, or perhaps a left turn lane from westbound 104. I'm not sure who would handle that one. Mike, Brent, someone?
I can talk through some of the considerations here, but Mike, feel free to jump in, or Patty as well, or really any of the other project partners if you have a thought to add. But one of the items we really wanted to consider was something that Mike brought up, which is fairness and keeping a good order. So we were in a little bit of a dilemma with this question. We obviously would like to make this as smooth a process as possible for those folks coming from the community of Kingston, the downtown area. But if we were to put in a left turn lane directly into the facility from the state route, we weren't able to find a way that was fair for those folks waiting in the left turn lane, but also the folks that were potentially queued much further on the state route heading eastbound on SR 104. We need to be able to make sure that we're getting people in an order. And the best way to do that is really just to have a single line. So what we have been talking about is that Barber Cutoff Road would be the ideal spot for folks to get into that line, whether they come northbound on Barber Cutoff Road and make a right turn into what would be eastbound SR 104, or potentially if there's a way to implement some sort of U-turn improvement to turn around traffic at that intersection at Barber Cutoff. That's really what we had landed on as the best solution to be able to preserve that fairness and that order we were shooting for.
Right, that also speaks to consistency of operations, so that it's not different for any potential users of the ferry system. So that was a part of the traffic operations, ferry operations, and consistency of use. One of the things we did consider, and it speaks to a couple of the questions and topics that we talked about already, was how the lot operates. Even in low times, it still operates. So we didn't, through a variety of conversations and meeting with the partners and looking at some modeling, having a consistent operation and consistent use, which includes that how do you access the lot, made much better sense for for the community and for the function of the facility.
And then there's a question from Beth for Brent. You mentioned the assumption that the realignment was presumed done before the holding lot or the Lindvog lot. It's the suggestion being that the order of the projects be reversed. And if you could maybe touch base on that one. I know it's partly because they are on different yet parallel tracks. The realignment being that it's further along in terms of preliminary engineering and has funding for right-of-way acquisition, which is very different for the holding lot because we would have to be able to take it to the next level. If you could talk to that.
Yeah, and I think, Beth, maybe I misspoke a bit here. To clarify, I was really talking about when we look out to 2040, which is what we were doing with the traffic analysis, we had it as an assumption that this SR 104 project would be completed. Now, I don't know exactly, and I'll defer to others to talk about the timing of the two and which one would come first and which would be second. I do agree that you're spot on with talking about roundabouts being a bad mix with gridlock because they can really basically muck up for all directions and every user of the roundabout. But the intent I was getting at was really just that we did assume the project would be completed, which does have impacts on how you access the dock because the dock lot would see a change. You'd actually shift kind of your orientation of the dock lot under that SR 104 realignment project.
And then there's a question from Walt or Bobby. I'm assuming it's Walt, but it may be Bobby. And that being, what about the transit traffic flow? How will that approach?
So we've described, I believe we've discussed that we will not have transit going through the remote holding lot, that it would be able to proceed down. I'm not exactly sure if the path has been finalized for what that would look like, but the transit riders and transit vehicles would not be subject to waiting in the holding lot since they would just become, generally passenger vehicles, I believe, on the, or foot traffic onto the remote, the ferry once they get down to the dock.
Okay. And then we had a question from Mark. Will all or part of the lot be available for park and ride facility during periods of low demand? Which may be an operational question that's yet to be determined or discussed. But has there been any thought or discussion about that?
It has been one of the things that we discussed, and at least at the moment, and we didn't dig into that potential for how that would operate or how that timing would work. It was discussed, so it was an idea that was bantered around a few times, but at the moment in the scope of the task at hand, figuring out how or if that would work wasn't fully evaluated at this point.
Okay. And then Cameron had a question about signage on 104 directing traffic into the holding lot and where some of the thinking was related to that signage locations.
I can go ahead and speak to that. We did look at a number of locations where to go ahead and put in standard ferry signing. That was actually one of the advantages about having the lot operate in a continuous fashion. We did not have to have specialty signing that would say use when flashing or changeable message signs, which helped reduce the cost. But what this, it would just be standard ferry signing with arrows directing motorists to use the holding lot. Probably green on, white on green signs as well. So we would go ahead and plan on putting those signs on 104 before the holding lot as folks are coming into Kingston, but also at locations at Kingston, kind of near the ferry, just indicating that you need to use the holding lot. So they would be actually pointing out of town to go ahead and have them come in. But that is definitely something as design continues, that those exact locations will be determined.
And Miyake had a question, I think it was similar, about the potential outside of the busy times, the ability for businesses to use the space as a surface lot. And I think we touched base on that one. Cameron had another question, a follow-up question about signalization improvements. at the intersection of Lindvog. So obviously they would have to be changed out to be able to coordinate with a platooning in the different, the holding lots. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. So what would, we definitely would have some signal improvements that would have to go at that lot. The controller cabinet is actually positioned outside of where our footprint is. So that's a good thing. But the for what a average day user would see would be when you're heading into Kingston from the lot, we would add a couple of traffic signal heads, red, yellow, green, on the same mast arm that would be controlling the departure lane out of the holding lot, as well as a sign that would have a no right turn symbol that would come on when the holding lot was being released on that. So, and as in addition, there'd also be pedestrian crossing signals, so that would, as pedestrians are crossing that release lane, that they would be held during that time, so there would not be a conflict between those maneuvers. So those are the signalized improvements that we're looking at. In addition, just because of the fact that those signals are in the same direction, those signals for the holding lot would have adjustments so that they could only be visible for motorists who are leaving the holding lot. In fact, actually, a good example is, like I had mentioned, is in Clinton, right before the ferry dock there. They've got a similar situation where a holding lane is on the shoulder, and then you have general purpose traffic using the outside lane, which may need to turn right in front of them. And so it's a very similar approach that would be used at this intersection.
Dave had a question about it. So if you're using license plate readers for enforcement, why do you need a separate ticket dispenser?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that was actually something that the partners had brought up as well during the development of this. One of the advantages about having that ticket reader is, number one, we can control the flow. So for example, if two vehicles have pulled up at the same time, we can make sure that one goes, then the other. So that allows it to be controlled physically. But also, in addition, this gives actually another point where a driver can be informed of what lane they use. So for example, they would go ahead and they get the auditory cue of what lane, but then also too, they have the tactile ticket that they can go ahead and also refer to as well. Just in addition, it was just giving another point of information to drivers who may not be familiar with the situation. So yeah.
Okay. And Tekla asked a question that I think is near and dear to many folks' hearts, and that is there a chance to get a traffic circle at the Barber Cutoff Road to facilitate this, new heavier use of that intersection? I mean, this is definitely a need for that intersection, regardless of the remote holding lot functionality. But I didn't know if that had been discussed at all in your design process.
We didn't consider a roundabout at that area. I might defer any additional information or potential for that to the other folks, the county or WashDOT.
Okay. Well, we'll take it definitely under advisement. I think that is one that we have been talking about for a while. And Joanne knows that I'll bring it up now and again. So, but Tekla is duly noted. So Mark had a question about phasing. And so if the remote holding lot were thought about in terms of phases, and if so, what would that order look like, and which would be sort of the initial starter phase?
That's an excellent question, and one that's we've been talking with the partners with. And one initial thought is thinking about doing improvements on the shoulder, so you have a proper holding lane, so that we can eliminate some of those safety challenges that are happening right now, just with having not a full holding lane on the shoulder of SR 104, but also to start putting in some of the IT systems. So that starts building the system and the infrastructure needed so when the holding lot, more of the holding lot is constructed, then that's ready to go. That also helps break up the costs and makes it a little bit more feasible from a funding perspective.
Great. And kind of related to that, Walt had a question about, so what if reservations are in effect by, say, 2040?
To clarify, that's the ferry.
Oh yeah, the ferry reservation.
System. For this, we did talk about the ferry reservation system for this project. Through a variety of conversations with the partners, it was determined that, at least at this point in time, that a ferry reservation system for this route was not planned. So from modeling or looking at how that would work with this lot, we didn't do any analysis on that detail. However, with the infrastructure that's currently planned for the system, it could easily be something that was implemented.
Okay. And Jerry, I thought you were Nancy, but I guess you're Jerry. Thank you for putting your name in this question. Also was around phasing, given sort of the financial situation with the state, et cetera. And I think we hopefully have addressed your question on that, the possibility of phasing. If not, put in another question if you would. Ron, I think we talked about the reservation system. Sorry, and that was metering, not deterring. Okay, let's see. Cameron had a question, are there any changes to the current sidewalks and pedestrian push buttons as part of that?
So other than immediately at the intersection for Lindvog and SR 104, we didn't look at any pedestrian improvements on the rest of the corridor. This particular feasibility study was really focused, very centered on the lot itself and how that would function with the ferry system.
Okay. And then Beth had a question. She's just looking for a ballpark estimate of how much it might cost to purchase and install one of the gate arms, boarding pass dispensing machines, and the lighting equipment. It's basically gets back to the phasing and implementing probably one of the technology side of it first. Has anyone broken down that 10 million estimate such that what would this initial portion be?
Mike, do you remember those unit costs off the top of your head? I know we did break down the cost to develop the overall total. I don't have that number in front of me immediately.
Yeah, unfortunately, we like Patty said, I don't know that number off the top of my head. Trying to figure out, I do know even just installing even one of those signs that are used is in the $12,000 to $15,000 range, but that's one of the changeable message signs. As Patty had mentioned, also too, about looking at potential phasing options and looking at what controls could we do that we could implement in a cheaper fashion, but would still have some impact as well. And we would look at something like that, like 1 or 2 gates, some traffic signal modifications that we could make work in a very, it is a less than $10 million cost.
So, and then the last question here, because I think we want to make sure we have plenty of time to talk about the realignment as well, and we're scheduled till 3:30. But again, it's another question about sort of lot usage during low demand times. And from what I'm hearing is that there's probably the consistency of utilization so that we don't confuse users by changing it up from one time of the day or one season to another. But obviously that would be one of those questions that could be entertained further down the road. So in terms of the realignment project, not sure who to, I guess it would be Andy that we would, or David, to kind of put on the hot seat to talk a little bit about that, where we're at.
I can do that. Unless you want to do it, Andy.
Oh, go ahead, David, and I'll
Or I was thinking Andy Larson, so I wasn't, see, but David, if you want to do it, go for it.
Great. Yes, so for the realignment, Andy Larson's group with WashData is conducting the preliminary engineering right now, which is fully funded. And we're hoping to have that completed by a December or January framework as part of that. We also have the right-of-way phase, which is completely funded, and we'll be using some financial mechanisms through WashDOT called toll tax credits that will allow us to provide a contribution to that going through. And that will be starting as soon as we can get the preliminary engineering done. So that'll be sometime hopefully in the spring as we move forward. For the construction, Andy Larson's team was able to try and phase the project, but there was a basic minimum phasing, the first phase to do the realignment that has a fairly hefty price tag. And so the phase 1 and phase 2, the county and WashDOT went to and applied for federal STP, Surface Transportation Program funding. We are on a contingency list, or 2 contingency lists for phase 1, or 2 contingency lists for phase 1 and 1 contingency list for phase 2 for funding as part of that. The county is also going to be submitting a grant application for phase 1 to the Transportation Improvement Board, the TIB. The odds are, we don't know as part of that, but we will be submitting the phase 1 to that program next week, and hopefully we can get some funding from that also. We also have some aspects on the design. As you saw in that modeling simulation, the realignment puts both the egress and the ingress, the incoming and the outgoing ferry traffic on First Avenue. And that is a 4-lane facility as we're planning it right now. The county is working with WashDOT and the Washington State Ferries to see, can we actually, as you know, as the vehicles are exiting off the boat, there's 2 lanes and they merge at Iowa as you're part of that. If we can get the 2 lanes to merge before it gets to Washington Boulevard, then we could reduce the needed number of lanes as part of the realignment down to 3. That would be a great benefit to Kingston to have a smaller facility, for impacts to the community, and also would significantly reduce the costs for not adding an extra lane, and also for right-of-way going through. We had Washington State Ferries and WashDOT had planned to do a test zipper merge just before the COVID-19 shut everything down. But the good news is good news that traffic is up, or bad news, how you want to do that. But traffic on the ferries is up. And so WashDOT and the ferries are setting up a test within the next couple of weeks to see if that merge can successfully operate. And the question they're trying to answer is not that, of course, people can merge and they can do it, but will it impact the offloading time of the ferry? And that's going to be the determination. So can they keep the traffic flowing off the ferries without that disruption, merge successfully before they gets to Washington Boulevard, and then have a 1-lane facility going through? And so hopefully we'll get some answers in the next couple of weeks. And if the answer is, well, it works pretty well, then Andy Larson's team can start designing a 3-lane facility instead of a 4-lane facility. And that will help us in our funding to cut the costs, of course.
David, so if that is successful, say that it zips along and it really works and doesn't impact the offloading of the ferries, is there an opportunity to go back to for the federal funding related to the right-of-way acquisition to reprogram that at all?
Not specifically, but what would be good is many times on the contingency list, they have a certain amount of money that's available.
Mm-hmm.
And many times it's not enough money for what you need for the project. And this is an example where we need the full amount to build the project. So if we need less money, that means that increases our chance that there will be available funds.
Mm-hmm.
And also with the TIB, that would the Transportation Improvement Board, the grant we're going after now, we'll have that one we could work with them and have a smaller ask for the grant. in the time frame that they do for selection.
Okay. And again, can you refresh our memories? What's their selection time frame for projects?
Well, the TIB will know in about November whether we're on their list or not.
Okay.
As part of that. And if we don't get any inquiries, we'll probably know sooner because they usually like to do site visits for
Very
the
good.
people they're considering.
Okay. Andy Larson, anything else that you wanted to offer in terms of an update on this, the realignment?
No, I think that David covered it pretty well.
Okay, and what about the right-of-way conversations and the status of that? I would imagine your right-of-way division's been working with property owners?
Not at this time, no. I believe the money doesn't come available till the end of the year at the earliest, and I don't think there's been an agreement set up yet between WashDOT and the county for that.
Okay.
Yes, we still need to make the agreement to conduct the right-of-way process with WashDOT.
Okay, which means then with the zipper test and timing actually helps to maybe better define just the scope of that. Okay. So we have a question in the chat box. The original plans recognize that 104 needs additional lanes from Iowa to Lindvog. How is that part of the realignment being factored into the design and timeline? So I know that the design did not go all the way from Iowa to Limbog.
Correct. The county and WashDOT haven't advanced a program for that section from Bannister to Lindvog. The realignment project that we're doing right now is purely for it within the Kingston Community Center. As part of that, with the Bannister is the endpoint going through. And so that would be a follow-on project to how do we do the complete streets that are in the Kingston Complete Streets plan for that section of 104 as a next phase or an additional phase coming forward.
So maybe to refine that question a little bit, whereas with the Washington Boulevard project, we took into account this potential realignment for how that was designed and configured, so they could be easily tweaked and changed. Is the phase one of the realignment project taking into account some potential future state and the ability to adapt into what that might be? So in other words, right now, I mean, you have certain parameters from where your design is ending, but is that design being looked at such that it can be easily adapted to a future project that looks from Bannister to Lindvog?
I would say there's nothing in our design that would be in the way of doing that or prevent it from being done.
Okay, thank you. Other questions on the realignment? I'm not seeing any. Other questions on the remote holding lot feasibility study? So the question, does the feasibility study meet the OFM pre-design manual? And anyone can jump in with that one. Patty?
Yeah, sorry, I was finding the mute again. Yes, the intent was that all documents met the requirement to fulfill those, to make it ready to move forward. So yes.
Great. And Linda Owens had a question about the cost of realignment. So there were two phases to that. The first phase being just south of $5 million. And I can't remember the second phase there, David. You're muted.
It was about 2.5 million.
Yep.
2.5 for the second phase. Okay. So a total of about 7.5.
Correct.
And that second phase, Commissioner, included the reconfiguration of Main Street in the downtown segment.
Okay. And then Chris had a question about the time frame for construction of the lot, assuming funding. So say we had the money today and everything was out to bid and we could start building. I'm interpreting this question to mean, how long would it actually take to construct? Any guesses?
I haven't worked through a construction schedule, but just given the complexity of managing the wetlands, wetland mitigation, earthwork, knowing that the soils on site, while they are reusable for structural backfill and compaction, they are moisture sensitive. So by the time you are careful with the soils, you're probably looking at 2 years because of just seasonality and management of the soils.
Okay. Mark had a question about funding sources and timeline for the Lindvog lot. And the question is, independent of the 104 realignment? And so they are independent yet related. So has there been any discussion around funding sources and the timeline of the Lindvog lot? And obviously, it gets back to, in some part, a concept of phasing and being able to do different pieces of that.
So Commissioner Gelder, we haven't addressed, until we get the phasing and the photo, the ideas of what the lot is, we haven't looked at the strategies to advance it forward or how it would go to different funding sources.
Okay, so determining phasing is next, and then strategies moving forward from there. We had a question for Ron about and this might be a question for Andy or David, about the cost of the 3 lanes. So if the zipper study is successful, is there any kind of a guesstimate from the $5 million mark for the current configuration, just how much of a reduction potentially could a 3-lane approach be instead?
We haven't run an estimate for that yet, so I couldn't give you an answer.
Okay, it'll be less. Let's just say that in terms of right-of-way, actual construction materials, etc. So, so Beth said it's her understanding that implementing a reservation on the Kingston Edmonds ferry run is in the long-range plan. It's pending an IT upgrade for the additional records and run specific rules. So if any more work is done on the Lindvog remote lot design, it should anticipate a reservation system in the plan. So more of a statement. Dave is saying that it imagines most of the cost of the remote lot is in the earthwork, drainage, and paving, but the most benefit to the community is in the metering from that location. It should be a priority to find a phasing approach to implement that metering. And I think we did talk about that early on, that the biggest lift of the project was to be able to do the active traffic management, the IT side of things. And then Walt asked, do cost estimates include a risk management contingency inflation adjustment? So a contingency and inflation factor in the cost.
I can speak to the remote lot. So that one does include a contingency. It does not include an inflation adjustment, and we didn't include that at this point because we weren't quite sure of timing. So it does include a contingency, but does not include inflation.
Okay. And the realignment project, address that one as well at the same time?
That would be the same. We do include contingencies in there, but it is in current dollars.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions? Mary, Steve, other things that you want to make sure that folks know about while we have this meeting?
Yeah, one thing we did discuss is some of the concepts of phasing, and keep in mind that because of the more significant wetland that's on the property, it really is a drainage that comes from if you would, the northern across Highway 104, and this drainage line is going to really be problematic for limiting some of the phasing, because you'll have to really go directly to completing that wetland mitigation prior to really opening up any particular lane, because it is going to be necessary to fill a portion of that wetland. There's just no avoiding it. So, with the concept of that particular wetland problem, and some of the limits for, say, if we had 3 lanes or 3 or 4 lanes or something like that, or a way to attenuate, really don't save anything if we build something right by the existing lots right now versus constructing what needs to be constructed for the metering system and all of the infrastructure and lighting and signalization that would need to occur further down on 104. So it is a bit of a dilemma because of that particular wetland. That the category 3 wetland that Patty was talking about was really the more the higher quality of wetland, if you will, the category 3. So, but it's something we're going to take a look at for sure here in further phasing. And obviously the design element, having a 30% design is very beneficial for next phasing too. Typically in these projects, we go from 30 to 60 and 90. And then at that point, we can prepare for bids and things like that too. So I'm very pleased with the product, and also the professional presentation by Petit. I thought was, this is my 4th time now seeing it, and every time I do learn something else. And Mary, do you want to talk a little bit?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on what a good thing I think this meeting has been, and the ability for people who are all working on this project throughout the whole community to ask important questions. And I think those point out some things we really need to get clear about, like, is a reservation system in or out, and some things like that I've noticed as we've gone through. Even if there's a very simple answer, the fact that there are 2 different versions out in the world, we need to clarify those things. So I'm really, really appreciative of everyone who participated here.
Thank you. So there's a question about, from Walt, is the feasibility study and reports posted online? And I think the port has a landing page for that. Can you confirm?
I believe so, but I did see a message from Allison. We're going to make sure that the cultural resource report is not online, and if we have that, and Rebecca, I'm not sure if some of the report was on the county website too. We want to make sure that any sensitive information in relation to tribal cultural resources is negated from the publication. So we will make sure that is taken off. So I'll make sure that
Tara has already has already removed it. Yes,
Tara
gone.
removed it. Tara,
Yep.
you are awesome.
She is. She is very fast.
Ask and you shall receive. So a couple questions about the number of folks that have participated today. So we've actually had 19 panelists. That includes sort of Rebecca, who's kind of working everything behind the scenes, and Jennifer, but we have 19 panelists, and we had upwards of 20 attendees. So, we've had about 40 folks that have been part of this meeting today, and in many ways outside of the Village Green, this is probably our only way to get 40 people in one space at the same time, at least virtually, if nothing else. So that's been great. And Ron had a question, how will you communicate this to the public? And I think we'll have the opportunity to, because we have recorded this, I think we'll be able to share and have this recording available either through the port or the county as well.
Yes.
So that
Yes.
folks weren't able to attend, they can at least see it and see some of the images along with the other reports and documents. And we also have in the chat box the web address for the materials. It's under the Port of Kingston.org/governance-2. And Tara noted that it was posted online in the port website, and she did in fact remove those other documents. And
that's
so
good.
with that, we are at 3:27. I just want to make sure that if WashDOT, Joanne, or anyone from Ferries would, since you attended, I appreciate you being here to see all of this as well. But did anyone have any parting thoughts before we adjourn for today?
No, I think it's great that everyone came together and all the funding partners, and the port took on the lead. So I thank you for that. And I think there's a lot of good work done here, and look forward to seeing if there's some funding that can come along with it. So thank you.
Well,
I'll just echo
all hope for that one.
This is, what Joanne said, this is super helpful for us as we, the whole world has changed in the last few months. And I know our planners have told us that they don't think our ridership will ever come back to the level it was, but we're already seeing this summer that this is a popular route. So, helpful to hear your plans. And, and Greg, who lives there and is our operations director, for him to be able to work with us on, how we move forward and help with these efforts.
Great. Well, if there are no other thoughts that anyone else wants to share, definitely thank you all for being part of the panel and for all of our attendees coming today. It's been great. We'll make sure that we get this recording posted as quickly as we can. I know it probably creates some MP4 file or whatever that should be readable by most folks, but that's a
right.
level of technology that's not my strong suit. So we have other folks that can make that happen. And again, thank you all for being here. We'll make sure that we, if anyone is interested, you can capture the chat box by looking down at the bottom, and there are 3 dots that say more, and then you actually have an option to save chat. So if you ever want to go back, any of our participants or panelists, you can do that as well, and we'll make sure that we do that. Jennifer, if you can make sure that we save those and have those, the saved chat as one of the documents we post as well, so that folks can understand the questions, although I read them out, so most folks will have the question as well as the response. So,
right.
Again, thank you all for being here, and the sun will come back, and we will have a great weekend and enjoy it, and stay safe out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patty.
Bye. You're
Excellent
welcome.
job again. You guys are awesome.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Definitely appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah, you're welcome. I just was going to let just
Yeah, nice work, Rebecca.
everybody get out of here. Yeah,
Okay.
okay. I will. Do you have a sense between the two of you, actually, since you're here, where you want to put the recording for this?
We have a page for the county. Let's put it there. We'll check with David Fort on that, make sure it's in the right spot. We could also probably put one under the KCAC page.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Put it one place and then kind of cross-link.
Okay,
that's
so
a great
face
idea.
Casey and the port.
Yep, and then we can. So yeah, Rob was saying technology-wise, how that was. There'll be some kind of MP something file. So if we could just get a copy of that, I think Tara can place that on the website too. that'd be awesome.
And I'd also give it to Andy Larson for the WashDOT project
Yes.
site.
Yeah. I was just going to ask about the project site. I was trying to remember who's the keeper of that site. So.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Good.
So,
Very
okay.
good.
Yep, that'd be great.
Okay, thank you.
Nice
you
work,
all.
Rebecca.
Yep.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, bye now. Bye.